You're all good, Hub.
Coming down in 3, 2, 1. Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to a slightly abbreviated special Thanksgiving edition of our ShawLocal.com podcast. I am Hub Arkush, along with our ShawLocal.com Chicago Bears beat reporter, Sean Hammond, and of course, our Shaw Media Group sports editor, Kyle Nabors. We are the three amigos every week. And guys, we apologize for those of you joining us live via Twitter on YouTube. We know we're about 15 minutes late, but you probably also know at this point that's because we're breaking a little news this morning and we're continuing to flesh out the story as we go. It will not be this entire abbreviated podcast, but we do want to jump right into it. Guys, we've been talking about this, the three of us and myself, with a lot of folks on the radio and the media room at Halas Hall, with fans around the city for weeks now. There was a very strange occurrence at Halas Hall on the Monday after the Bears' Week 4 win over the Detroit Lions. On Monday, Matt Nagy came into the room and assured us that Andy Dalton, when healthy, would be the Bears starter. Did not know at that point if Dalton would be healthy for the following Sunday's game against the Las Vegas Raiders. On Wednesday morning, after being silent on Tuesday, Nagy came back and said that the decision had been made to make Justin Fields the permanent first-string quarterback of the Chicago Bears. The Bears went out and beat the Raiders impressively, more with their defense and Khalil Mack than their offense, and they have not won a football game since. With all that has broken in the last 36 hours about the future of Matt Nagy, it certainly seems relative to discuss where that decision came from, because that decision played as much, if not more than anything else, into the current losing streak. And guys, that's where we pick it up as we're going. Again, you can read about it at ShawLocal.com. I will have the story flushed out for you and extensive with all the details by later on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. For those of you who are not with us live but are listening to the podcast, you know about it by now. And so, Kyle, as the more veteran of my partners, I'll come to you first. Have you ever seen a more bizarre story than this, is how it's developed? And I'm talking about the bogus report that broke on Tuesday about Matt being told on Monday that he was being fired but still had to coach the Lions game. Everything that has ensued, and now that we have been able to add this last piece of the puzzle as to how things have gotten as crazy as they've gotten.
It was weird to log on yesterday morning and first see the patch.com report. And I mean, I don't want to take a shot at hardworking journalists. It's just, one, it immediately stuck out because it wasn't anyone on the Bears beat. And it wasn't anyone on the national level, which is what you usually expect. I mean, we've come to the point in the NFL landscape that a lot of this stuff gets funneled to those guys that we're used to seeing: Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, Jay Glazer. No one had said anything about it. Even an hour, let's say an hour and a half after that report was published by Patch.com, no one had confirmed the reporting, which I found really odd. And then the day just got weirder, because then you expected some kind of a denial from the Bears, or at least, them switching their schedule around to allow, Ryan Pace or Ted Phillips or someone to get up there before Chris Tabor got up and started speaking. But he was the first one up there and really had to take the first bullet, which was weird to begin with. And then Matt denied the report, and then still silence out of Halas Hall. So very bizarre all the way around, Hub.
Sean, we're up there every day. We're around this all the time. And to Kyle's point, I think the position that Chris Tabor was put in yesterday was inexcusable, because he took the podium about 45 minutes to an hour before Matt Nagy came in to say that the report was inaccurate. Now, when he says the report is inaccurate, that leaves the door open quite a bit. But then when he followed and said that he had not spoken to George or Ted or Ryan since the end of the Ravens game, that made clear that he was saying the report was not true. And I don't care if you're a rookie or a veteran, those of us who have been around the business a while, it never made sense. And like Kyle, I don't want to take a shot at the reporter. By now you've heard he's won a Pulitzer Prize. Obviously he knows his business, but obviously the story was planted to anybody who's worked the NFL beat and been around an NFL team. And that is actually one of the pieces of this puzzle that I'm sure is still going to play out, because somebody's going to keep digging until they find out who planted the story. But in the end, that has become less important because it accomplished its purpose. There doesn't appear to be any salvaging Matt Nagy's job at this point. I don't even know if it's clear. We're reporting for everybody at about noon on Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And as we talk, I'd say it's probably better than 50-50, but no sure thing that Matt will still be the head coach at kickoff on Thursday.
Yeah, it's, those of you who are listening to this, who aren't live with us right now, this thing is changing by the hour. So who knows where things will be at when you're listening to this. But I thought it was telling that nobody, the GM, the chairman, nobody came down and said, we're still behind Matt Nagy as the coach. I mean, that says as much as anything that anybody else said yesterday. It was an unfair situation for Chris Tabor to be put in. I thought the Bears should have done something, whether that's just release a one paragraph press release. It's really not that big of a deal to do something like that. It's not that hard, I guess.
Yeah.
Just shuffle the schedule and put Matt Nagy first.
The report, it's really simple. The report reports that Matt Nagy will be fired after Friday's game are inaccurate. That's all they had to do. Even if you're lying, that's all you need to do, because what you do by not doing that is you create, just maybe not panic in the locker room, but these are human beings. These players and these coaches are talking about it and they're wondering if it's true. By at least putting it out there, you could at least try and save your locker room. So at the very least, they're focused on Thursday's game. By allowing this to linger, it just makes it worse.
Well, and Kyle, I've talked to a number of NFL people over the last 36 hours, and some do want to make the point that there was a decision to be made by Bears ownership and management to intentionally not respond to the report, because the atmosphere had become so poisoned that as soon as you do respond to the report, you then also have to respond to everything that has happened since, and you can't get into that never-ending cycle. And there is the concern that while the report was obviously not accurate, clearly the McCaskies and Ted Phillips were caught as flat-footed as everybody else by it and didn't know how to respond. But if you do then fire Matt Nagy after the Lions game, particularly if they win the game, then you're in the position of people saying, well, they lied. It was accurate. And so you're just giving the thing legs. And so it's so unfortunate the way it happened. But I think, to me, the report has become irrelevant at this point, because what really matters is the damage that is being done not only to Matt Nagy and his family, but his entire coaching staff, every player in that locker room. The next thing that happened, and I unfortunately was away from Hallis Hall dealing with some personal issues, but I know Sean was working hard there all day. I was following it via streaming and trying to keep up and in contact with him. But players were brought out and they were forced to comment on it. And anybody who has covered this team knows that as of the final gun on Sunday, Matt Nagy had not lost his locker room. Now, I'm not saying everybody was happy. I know they weren't, but there were no indications that he had committed the cardinal sin for a head coach that always gets you fired when you lose your locker room. And there was no suggestion that had happened. Now, Sean, as I've read all the transcripts, watched all the video of the press conferences, not a single player said that he had. And yet now the media is trying to interpret what they are saying as suggesting that that's what they mean, even though it's not what they're saying. And that's where this thing has reached a point of ugliness that is just so unfortunate.
We're in a situation where nobody is believing anything anybody says.
Yeah.
Because they're not, even if a player thinks that Matt Nagy has lost the locker room, they're not going to say that in a press conference setting in public. And so it just creates a situation where we don't really know what people are truly thinking. I do, we had mostly veterans yesterday. To Sean Gibson and Allen Robinson were talking, and they both said, publicly that they thought that the locker room is still behind Matt Nagy and that these guys still believe in him as their coach. And I thought, we got
sorry guys, we're good. Don't worry.
Dog cameo here.
Yeah, no, Liza the puppy went and did something she shouldn't. She's fine. Go ahead.
Allen Robinson, I lost my train of thought there.
Well, here's the thing.
I'm sorry, guys.
That's all good.
No, you're all good. Sean, what you're talking about, and this is where the COVID protocols, where we've lost locker room access, is actually makes our job reporting this accurately, because I was in the locker room at the end of the Trestman era and the end of the Fox era. And listen, this situation is not as dire as either of those situations, honestly, where both of those locker rooms were in pretty bad shape. But you got a lot better sense for how players and coaches were feeling when you were around them in that locker room setting. You don't get that when guys are up at a podium, and really these are guys that, the media might request them, but the PR staff has the final say about who's going up there, right?
Yeah, and I thought of what I was going to say now. Allen Robinson told us something to the effect of, we're paid to perform on game day, and we can't worry about any of that other stuff. And really, these guys, whether the coach is, it's such a quick turnaround this week, they don't really even have a whole lot of time to worry about that stuff as they're getting prepared to play a game tomorrow in 24 hours right now.
Just to clarify, guys, I'm embarrassed and I'm sorry. Molly, the adult, does not like Liza the puppy chewing on her ears with those little needle teeth. Everybody's fine. Don't worry about it. So we can move on. And Kyle, you make such a great point. In normal times, which I think we've all forgotten at this point, almost 2 years later, nobody knew before we did what the mood of the locker room was like and what was happening. And you were able to go, not only choose your one-on-ones, but have private conversations, even exchange cell phone numbers and be able to discuss this with some of the players. And all of that, due to the pandemic, has gone away. Nobody but the pandemic is to blame for that. And so you end up in this situation where everything is being filtered through somebody's prism. And you just, you have to be careful in how you interpret it. But what we do know, what I will say that I know emphatically is that it just never made sense from everything that we had heard from Matt Nagy that he was going to elevate Justin Fields at that point. If you look at his history, he is the guy who developed Patrick Mahomes as a rookie by keeping him on the bench, occasionally getting a package for him in a game, and teaching him to become one of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in the NFL right now. Now, I'm not saying that that's all to Matt Nagy's credit. Obviously Andy Reid is there, Eric Bieniemy was there. There were other people involved, and Patrick Mahomes is a special player, but you knew that was his formula. And for him to be so emphatic from the moment the kid was drafted that was going to be the formula, and then over a 48-hour period to make such a radical change, it never made sense. And I'm not reporting that Matt then, hung it up, started phoning it in, started trying to sabotage it. None of that is true, because obviously he still had to win to save his job. But now you have a coaching staff, and let's be honest about this, guys. This is the other part, and I'm working on this for the column that will be at shawlocal.com later today. Look at the veterans on this football team. They spent the entire offseason saying Andy Dalton is our guy, making Andy Dalton the leader, building the offense for this year around him. And he got thrown under the bus with Matt Nagy after literally 5 quarters of football. How do you think the other veteran players in that locker room are going to react? It's not a slap at Justin Fields. He's the most innocent victim of all in this. He's still a great prospect. I still think he's going to be a great quarterback. Not worried about how he's going to react to all this, because he seems to be a very bright and mature young man. He's tough-minded. He'll be fine. But there's no way that all the veterans in that locker room who are playing for contracts, guys like Akeem Hicks and Allen Robinson, are just going to jump on the Justin Fields bandwagon, especially when the offense is not going to function as well with an inexperienced rookie quarterback. So I think what we have to be careful about here, and I want to get to a couple questions here, Kyle, we're going to have to kind of go short here because of our shorter time, but there was one in particularly from Brian Rost. If you can get that up there, I want to make sure I get to answer that one. But when you look at what's now been going on in that locker room, there is no way that there must not have been a Andy Dalton camp and a Justin Fields camp. And it doesn't mean that all 48 guys weren't going all out to win on Sunday. We've seen the effort, but those are the kind of things that again generate eventually an end game like this.
Yeah, absolutely. The Hub, you want to take this question here? I think.
Sure. I didn't know if you guys wanted to comment on that.
No, I have some more thoughts on that, but I'll let you take this first. I think it's important to address this because it kind of ties into what I want to talk about.
It's a good point from Brian. Brian Rosta joins us, and thank you, Brian. It says, Hub, you used to say you were 100% positive that George and Ted do not meddle in football decisions. With your breaking story today, safe to say that has changed? Yes and no, Brian. I mean, it's a fair question. You're absolutely correct that's always the position I've taken. But I think what happened here is that George did not see this as a football decision, quote, football decision, so much as a business decision and directing the future of the franchise. There was some real excitement after that win over Detroit, and then even more so, with the Raiders game. But this happened after the Detroit game, and I think that what happened here is that George and maybe Ted, everybody hears the noise. They knew what was going on outside the organization. After that Cleveland game and that ultimate disaster, I think they were afraid of losing the fan base. They saw the excitement generated by the Lions win with Justin Fields, and I think that's what his decision was based on. I do not think it was because he was saying the team is going to be a better football team with Justin Fields at quarterback.
Well, it was a good business decision from that point because everybody wants to see Justin Fields, and Justin Fields jerseys are selling off the rack, but you can't have it both ways. I mean, this is still a football decision, whether football decisions and business decisions, go hand in hand in the NFL. But at the same time, this is exactly what he has always said that he doesn't do, which is meddle in the football side of things.
So this brings me back, and it's not exactly, but you talk about losing the locker room. I remember talking with Des Clark the night that Jerry Angelo was fired, and he talked about the beginning of the end of that regime. In his estimation, when they started to lose the locker room and lose the trust of the players, was when essentially it came down from above Lovie Smith that Alex Brown no longer had a starting job, that Mark Anderson was coming in, and I just that was really the first time when I was talking to an NFL player, and I realized the kind of the role when front offices and ownership start to meddle in those type of team decisions, how quickly it can snowball to where a level of distrust starts to evolve within your organization.
Yeah, again, there are so many moving parts here, and guys, the part that I do think we have to be extremely careful about is not to ignore the list of Matt Nagy's own mistakes. I mean, nobody I shouldn't say nobody, I'm the one who's reporting the story. I am not suggesting in any way that the decision to overrule his head coach and make Justin Fields the starting quarterback is the only reason that Matt Nagy's job is in jeopardy and the reason he's being fired now. I don't think that's the case. I mean, 3.5 years into learning how to do the job, Matt has made more than enough mistakes to justify the conversation about whether he should be retained or not. But what we're really focused on here is that the reason it's happening this way, the reason it's gotten so ugly, the reason that this losing streak has occurred, and again, let's be careful. Justin Fields isn't the reason the Bears have lost their last 5 games. I mean, he is a major contributor. He is a big part of the reason why the offense still has no rhythm, no, consistency, no real success on the football field, because he's learning on the job, not because he's a bad quarterback, and certainly not because he's a bad guy. And there is also no proof that it would be better with Andy Dalton. But look at Andy Dalton's history, guys. He took 5 straight average football teams in Cincinnati to the playoffs. No, he didn't win playoff games, but went out and won 10, 11 games a season. He's a game manager. It was what the plan was built around this year. And so suddenly, between week 4 and week 5, you throw out an entire off season's worth of work and say, we're going to let the rookie learn on the job. That's the reason for the 5, or that's the biggest contributor, I should say, to the 5-game losing streak, as far as I'm concerned, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're starting a rookie quarterback, you're in jeopardy of something like this, and I'm sure that's part of the reason why Matt Nagy was resistant to doing that, and this is in some regards, we're going back in time here and looking at a moment, 2 months ago, but it's a big reason why things have developed the way that they have, and why the Bears are in this losing streak, and now we're talking about Matt Nagy potentially being out as the head coach, in the near future. And this is definitely a decision that has affected his ability to do the job.
Kyle, I think the developing part of this story is what does it do to the Bears' ability now to find a quality successor to Matt Nagy? We don't know. One of the great unknowns in this continues to be Ryan Pace, and whatever happens here, Whether Matt survives the Lions game, whether he's here till the end of the year, whether he somehow miraculously stays and wins 7 in a row, and it's a different conversation. I'm not even pretending that that's likely to happen. I'm just saying, you can't ignore anything.
It is the NFL.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, you do have to move on. And none of my research and digging has given me any better feel for where George McCaskey is on Ryan Pace. I do believe, guys, that all of the conversation we've heard that sometimes drove us almost a distraction about the incredible collaboration between Ryan and Matt was true. I don't have any issue with that. Ryan comes out as an interesting player in all this because he's the guy who again gave up extra first-round picks and drafted Justin Fields. And I don't know, I know Ryan Pace is a smart enough football guy to know that the team had far less chance of winning with Justin Fields being forced onto the field, that the offense was going to struggle with a rookie quarterback learning on the job. But it's, for Matt Nagy, I think that developing Justin Fields was important, but winning football games was more important in his effort to keep his job. For Ryan Pace, it may be more important to develop Justin Fields than it is to win football games right now. That relationship between him and the McCaskies is unclear to us. And I think that's where, assuming this plays out the way it looks like it's going to, with Matt being relieved in the next days or weeks, that's where the new focus will have to be as we try and determine the Bears' ability to come out of this in a better position than they went into it.
Well, I mean, you said that the relationship between Ryan Pace and the McCaskies is unclear. I'd say equally unclear is now the relationship between Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace. I mean, we haven't heard from Ryan since the beginning of the season, I believe, or right before the beginning of the season. Now, if Ryan was the person to deliver that order from George McCaskey, and maybe was even, we have no idea, maybe he was on board with it, like after talking with him, and if you, obviously, as you point out, they potentially have divergent goals here in terms of trying to save their own jobs. Who knows how well those two are still working together? I'm just absolutely speculating, but those are questions you have, particularly when Ryan Pace doesn't make himself available to the media. There's actually a question here. See if I can find it from here, Tom Papalardo. What are your opinions on whether this latest controversy helps or hurts Ryan Pace to stay as GM?
Boy, Tom, as we were just discussing, it's the $64 million question right now. I just don't know. I suspect that if George McCaskey, first of all, I'm reporting that he did instruct Matt Nagy to make Justin Fields the starting quarterback. And I suspect if George had decided or has decided to move on from Matt Nagy, it probably puts Ryan Pace in a little stronger position because, the Bears haven't even pretended to go out and do GM coach searches on their own in the past. They've brought in executive search firms. They brought in Ernie Accorsi, and Ernie's a friend of mine. I haven't spoken to him in probably, 8-9 months now, but he's retired. Ernie is not going to be coming back to lead a search again. There are other successful NFL coaches and executives who do that kind of thing now. They could go out and find somebody else. But looking at where this football team is at and the fact that it's not necessarily, it's not a rebuild. This team, some of the rebuilding work on offense has already been done, and it is to Pace's credit. My suspicion is that Ryan may come out of this in a little stronger position. He may end up having a football czar, a president of football operations brought in above him. That might not necessarily be the worst thing. But my guess is that if in fact Ryan was ever in jeopardy, that his stock may have improved just slightly, Sean, more even out of necessity than accomplishment.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, Hub. I think this probably helps Ryan Pace in that regard. I mean, to put it really simple terms, if George McCaskey thinks that Justin Fields was a great pick and is a winner, and he's a guy who he wants starting, I mean, that's only endorsing what Pace did to bring Justin Fields here in the first place. And he's the guy who brought Fields here. He's the guy who really built that 2018 12-4 team. I know Matt Nagy coached that team, but Matt Nagy came in here, his first year and was handed that team and did a really good job with it. But that was Ryan Pace who built that defense and that team. And I don't know, I could see it going both ways. I would lean towards that this probably helps Pace a little bit.
Kyle, I don't know if you see the question there from Mike Johnson, but if you couldn't put Mike's question up,
I got you.
Mike wants to know. Oh, wait a minute. He must have two questions. All right. Well, no, go ahead. That was good. I can answer both of them. Mike wants to know, has any GM for the Bears been allowed to stay on board and hire 3 coaches? And he also had an earlier question, which he said, is it fair to say that Matt Nagy lost the press room? Okay. Relative to the first part of your question, the Bears, for the oldest team in the NFL, have probably had fewer head coaches than any team in the NFL, except for the Pittsburgh Steelers and the miraculous run that they've put on over the last 40-some years. What they have not had is many general managers. If you stop and think about it, Jim Finks was the first ever general manager other than George Halas. And after Jim left, that position was left open until Jerry Angelo was hired in 2001. You had Michael McCaskey as both the president and CEO acting as his own GM. You had Mark Hatley brought in as a top personnel guy, with some say over things, but not a GM. And if you just look at their history, Jim Finks hired initially Jack Pardee and then Neil Armstrong. And part of the reason, it's often been reported, he left because he was not consulted about the hiring of Mike Ditka. That's inaccurate. We'll get into that at another time. But part of the reason he left was because it was George Halas who hired Mike Ditka. So Jim Finks only hired 2 head coaches. You then get to Jerry Angelo, who only hired 1 head coach, which was Lovie Smith, and Phil Emery hired 1 head coach. So the answer to your question is not only no, but Jim Finks is the only one who ever got to hire 2. So we're going to have to wrap this up, guys. But I want to get both Sean and Kyle's thoughts on the other part of Mike's question. Is it fair to say that Matt Nagy lost the press room? If he did, then shame on the press. That is not our job, okay? And we are there to report. We are free to offer analysis and opinion, but to support or not support a coach or a general manager, that is not anywhere in our journalism ethics classes. That just is not something that should happen. I think, though, guys, that Matt Nagy has clearly lost the war in social media and in talk radio. And that is a newer, not new phenomena that I think is doing far more harm to the game than it is good. But relative to the press room, no, I don't think that's an issue. I think that we have a pretty good group in that room. And some of us are more opinionated than others, Sean. But I do think that Matt has been given a fair shake in terms of his 3.5 years of our working together. And I know that he's often the first one to say that.
Yeah, he's been given a fair shake, and he's, we've been around him for several years now, and you, Hub, more than myself can say, but it's not our job to say whether he's winning or losing the press room. I do agree with you that, in public opinion, in the internet world, certainly he lost that long ago, I think. Folks gave him a little bit of a chance here at the beginning of this year, but that ship sailed, I would say, a while ago.
Kyle, we're going to have to wrap this one up because we've got so much to do with the short week to try and get everything everybody wants. We are going to have not only a lot more, but more than anybody else at shawlocal.com about this developing story and news relative to the quarterback decision that was made. This is a developing story relative to Matt Nagy. As we record, it is 12:30 on Wednesday. I wish I could say I was certain that Matt is still going to be the head coach at kickoff tomorrow in Detroit, only because it would give us some certainty, not because I'm offering an opinion. It seems likely at this point that is what's going to happen. But, we'll have to watch that and see. And then after that, depending on the outcome of the game, we should know a lot more. Kyle, I asked you to kind of bring us in with, have you ever seen anything like this before? So I'm going to let you take us out before I say goodbye. Any final thoughts?
No, because for the first time in my life, we're used to the Bears waiting to make these types of decisions before the end of the season. And the first time in my life, this has the real potential to by Friday morning, by Saturday morning, that we could see a coaching change. I have no inside information to say that's for sure going to happen, but it certainly seems to be on the table.
Folks, we apologize for the abbreviated version of the podcast this week, but wanted to get you the news as it is breaking and as it is happening for those of you who join us live. We haven't even discussed this yet, but I have a sneaking suspicion we are not going to wait until a week from Friday at 9:30 in the morning for our next podcast. We'll figure that out as we see what happens in the next 24 and 48 hours. What you need to do is make sure you follow Kyle on Twitter at Kyle Nabors. Follow Sean at Sean_Hammond. Please follow me at Hub_Arkush. And if not before, make sure that today and for the next 24, 48 hours, you get to shawlocal.com, because we will continue to break news on this story as it develops. In the meantime, thank you so much for being with us this week. If you are hearing us before your Thanksgiving holiday, we hope it is the best one you've ever had. If you're hearing us after, we really hope you enjoyed it. And I do want to add one personal note here, guys. I'm not going to choose sides in this, but I will say that Matt Nagy, from the moment he got here, has carried himself with class and dignity. And there is no coach in the NFL that deserves to be dragged over the mud like he has been the last couple days, and apparently will continue to be for the next couple days. So more than anything, and I know how goofy this sounds, I wish the Nagy family a decent holiday and the best of everything in the future. We may still be working together. We just don't know. But it's just unfortunate that we've gotten to this point today as we have to say goodbye. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I know that's a strange way to say happy Thanksgiving, but it's what we've got. It's what we're dealing with. We'll talk to you again real soon on our shawlocal.com podcast.